Hello again, everyone. I am Chris Shura. This is the Citizen Sports Weekly for Monday, February 14th, Valentine's Day. How sweet it is, 2022. Robert Harding and Justin Ritzler with me. We're doing this on a Monday. Justin's got a pretty busy week ahead of him with sectionals, so this was really the best time to be able to do our video. Plus, it makes sense
Just
because
Justin? Just
did
Justin?
I say Robert Harding? I thought I mentioned your name.
I mean, where's Chris Shear in that mix? I mean, where's our senior sports correspondent? Why aren't you out in the field? Huh?
Someone's got to get the newspaper out. If someone else wants to
Okay.
do the news pages, then I'll be glad to. I thought you were our A guy off the bench here. That you were the guy that would usually steps in and helps out occasionally. But I understand you have a child now, so it's different. So.
Oh, don't blame it on her. It's just circumstances that have occurred in the last week that.
Okay. Well, it's
be
pretty
home.
crazy.
So.
Okay. Well, look, before we get started, I want to give props to Justin because he was the only one of the three of us who got it right. He picked the Rams to win the game, but he picked the Bengals to cover the spread. So bravo, Justin. You got it. I hope you put some money down on that pick because you would have done well. But congratulations. You got it right.
Well, Chris, I did a heck of a lot of hedging, whether it be via DraftKings, FanDuel. I did a playoff contest. I actually did pretty well, all things considered, yesterday. So, I'll save my thoughts on the game itself for a few minutes from now. But
yeah, sure.
The Wallet's finally doing well after just an absolute terrible season of gambling up to this point, and the picks just a terrible season. But hey, I'm some argue that momentum is not a thing. I disagree. I'm going to ride this for the rest of hockey season and into the 2022 NFL season. So
wow,
you have to look out.
Listen to this. Okay.
Pretty impressive. Pretty impressive.
Right.
So we're going to talk about the Super Bowl, and that's really about it. That's our lone topic. So for those of you who didn't watch the game last night, all one of you out there maybe, the Rams did beat the Bengals, and it was what was the score? 23-20, I believe. And this is the thing. I'm sorry, it was a bad game. It really was not
a game.
I did. Well, it's funny. I missed a decent chunk of the game in the first half because, and I'm not going to name names because it's not nice, but I went to a friend's house to watch the game. Okay. This friend does not have cable or satellite. So his idea was he had his laptop hooked up to his television and he was going to stream the game. Okay. Well, when you try to stream a game, unfortunately, the stream goes down. So I missed the first touchdown to Beckham. I'm pretty sure I missed the second touchdown. I think the Bengals had that maybe. I missed, or maybe it was a field goal. I missed a lot. I missed like Mixon throwing the halfback option. I mean, I had to get my phone out to look at the play-by-play. So I missed a good chunk of the first half where I said, I'm going to go home and watch the second half at home. So I left at just before halftime and got home as the third quarter was starting. So so I didn't see a lot of this the first half of the game, which is again, not to name names or anything, because my friend was very nice enough to have us over, have a nice party and stuff, and he was a great host. The food was good and everything was nice, and but unfortunately, sometimes it is nice to have cable or satellite. So one last thing before we get started, my buddy Dave Coleman, the Rams fan, he's been watching our videos. He's a loyal viewer. Dave, I am so happy for you. You've been a Rams fan since 1975, I believe. And, you've gone through some tough years this century. I mean, obviously your team won the Super Bowl back 22 years ago in January of 2000. You're back on top. You're back as a champion again. And I can't think of a better person who deserves to have his team win the Super Bowl. And Dave, just congratulations. I'm very, very happy for you. Okay, the game itself. I thought it was a bad game. Okay, it really was. I mean, the punters, I think, were getting tired after a while. There were so many 3-and-outs in this game. Now, look, were there some good plays? Were there some good drives? Were there some, was the game a complete clunker? No, it wasn't. But this was not a great game. I mean, look, compared to what we've seen in the conference championships, the divisional round, the wild card round. This was probably one of the worst of the playoff games of 2022, the season, or the 2021 regular season, I should say. So I don't know. I mean, Stafford, a couple picks. Burrow was on his back most of the time, as we expected. The running games were non-existent. I mean, Mixon did have some nice runs. I'll give him that. But it was just, it wasn't a good game. It was not a good game. I really think that it was not one of the better Super Bowls that we've seen in recent memory. Robert, your thoughts?
Well, since I actually saw the entire game, I will say that, there were different points in this game where you thought that maybe either team would, ride the momentum and really get something going. The Rams, when they struck first with that touchdown to Beckham, great throw by Stafford, even better catch by Beckham. And you thought that, okay, maybe the Rams will get something going here. And that didn't really happen. And then you flip it with the Bengals, they come out first play of the second half, and Burrow gets that touchdown to T. Higgins. Granted, certainly controversy with, the no call there, but, a huge play for them. And you thought that, well, maybe, this will really spark them in the second half and they might run away with this thing. But that's not what happened either. I thought that part of it was, overall, I thought that this was certainly a mediocre Super Bowl. I don't think, we'll have to worry about debating whether this was one of the great Super Bowls ever, whenever we rehash that debate down the line. But, I thought that, it was a close Super Bowl, which made it, worth watching. And I think that the way that the teams played down the stretch, to me, the Bengals really threw away too many opportunities. And, it's funny, it all really came back to the lack of an offensive line in front of Joe Burrow. I looked up this stat. The Rams had 6 sacks in the second half, including, when the Bengals intercepted that Matt Stafford pass after the T. Higgins touchdown, that ensuing drive there, I think they sacked Burrow twice, and then they sacked him 4 more times the rest of the way. That was really what people were talking about coming into this game, but we saw that the Rams, they got a little bit of pressure on Burrow, in the first half, but, certainly not nearly as much as they did in the second half. And that really, I think, was the story of the game, that the Rams defensive line got going. Aaron Donald was a menace. And that really turned the tide, I think, or at least prevented the Bengals from continuing that momentum they got from the early touchdown in the second half to really try and run away with this or extend their lead. And it was huge because it allowed the Rams to crawl back into it. And as we saw, win the game late. So, for me, I thought, it certainly did not lack drama. There was certainly a lot of plays made, especially on the defensive side of the ball in this game, mainly by the Rams defense that kept it a game. And fortunately for the Rams, they won it late. The one thing I'll say before throwing it over to Ritz is that, the officiating in this game drove me nuts. The blown call on the T. Higgins play was just egregious. Like you'd expect a Super Bowl crew to make that call. But, down the stretch, they had pretty much let these guys play for 56, 57 minutes. And then, the last few minutes of the game, it's like, oh, this is, the NFL officiating office saying, all right, let's throw flags everywhere. Now, I will say the hit to the head was, clear penalty there. But there were some other penalties that were, shall we say, ticky-tack. So I think it was, it kind of summed up the season, from the officiating standpoint, that here's the supposed best of the best, the best crew that they could put together. And still they found a way to, kind of involve themselves in a game, maybe a little too much than they should. So, but all in all, okay Super Bowl. I think a lot of credit goes to, the Rams defensive line. I thought Aaron Donald should have been the MVP for what he did in the second half. I mean, Cooper Kupp, made, a couple big catches there down the stretch, obviously had 2 touchdowns, but, there's no question that it was the Rams defensive line led by Aaron Donald really turned the tide of this game.
Absolutely agree with you on that one. I thought that Donald should have been MVP too. Justin, your thoughts on the game?
Well, I think this game is indicative or shows the downside of the amount of parity that's in the NFL right now, because I'm sure, Robert, you were seeing this on your timeline regarding the Bills. I certainly felt this way as a Packers fan, but I sat there thinking, like, you know what, my team would have beat either of these teams. In fact, they did during the regular season. It felt like we weren't watching two of the best teams, because really we weren't. The Bengals were a 10-7 team that really got hot in the postseason, I guess you could say. They got, a fortuitous matchup against a weak Titans team, and then, give them credit, they beat the Chiefs, and they did so in dramatic fashion. But, I don't think that over the course of the season we ever really viewed them as like a top 5 team. And really same with the Rams. I mean, they started off the season really hot. They went into a big lull in December and November, and ultimately were the 4th best team in the NFC. And they just so happen to win a few games and get to the Super Bowl. But I just agree. I agree that this is going to be kind of like probably how we view the Denver Carolina Super Bowl from 2015. Like, hey, good for the Rams. They set out to win a Super Bowl. They made a lot of moves for the specific purpose of winning the Super Bowl this year, and they accomplished that. But I don't see, especially with the Rams, I don't see the staying power from either of these teams, where we're going to see Los Angeles go on a 2-3 year run here and, reel off multiple Super Bowls. Same with the Bengals. I just think the AFC is just so loaded. It's going to be tough for anyone to string together a run. But you look at the last couple Super Bowls, the storylines were awesome. Last year you had the Chiefs trying to go back to back. Mahomes has turned himself into kind of the defining quarterback of this generation so far. So that was compelling. Obviously pretty much every Super Bowl that Tom Brady's been in over the last, 20 years has been compelling, especially, the last 5 years or so. So I just don't think that this Super Bowl, it didn't feel like it had those same stakes, that we're not watching some special team here. So, I think you have to view it in that context. Again, congrats to the Rams. Congrats to Cooper Kupp, who I think you can make a case had the best season by a wide receiver ever, factoring in what he did during the regular season and this postseason run. But I think ultimately we're going to look back in 5 to 10 years and say, like, whatever, it happened, wasn't too exciting. And then we'll move on and we'll see who gets this done in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, looking ahead for the future of the Bengals and the Rams, and the Bengals look, like you just said, Justin, the AFC's loaded. Cincinnati did get some good breaks. They made some of their own, but unless they get that offensive line fixed for pass protection, I don't think they're going to get to another Super Bowl anytime soon. And I mean, they definitely have the skill players. Their defense played very well. I was a little surprised. I mean, I knew they had a decent defense, but that defense played very well yesterday and made some big stops. And I mean, unfortunately, they couldn't get off the field at the end when it counted. But they were solid. Cincinnati did not lose the Super Bowl because of their defense. But again, if they don't get that offensive line going, and some coaching, a little bit of the coaching at the end there too, some play calls, I think you can kind of nick at a little bit. Take some issue with some of the play calls at the end of the game there. But yeah, the Bengals are going to have a tough time getting back to the Super Bowl. When you look at the Chiefs, Roberts, Bills. I mean, you wonder if the Ravens, if they get healthy with Lamar Jackson, what could happen? The Titans are still going to be halfway decent. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the Bengals the next couple of years, because they should be the best team in the AFC North for a while. I mean, the Steelers obviously have to get a new quarterback. The Ravens, like I just said, injuries and things like that, Lamar Jackson. And the Browns, I mean, look, they've got their own quarterback issues. It's a team in transition there too. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Bengals. As for the Rams, I mean, look, if the Rams bring everybody back next year except Andrew Whitworth, who I think is going to retire, if they can sign some of these, re-sign these guys, they're going to be free agents like Odell Beckham, and if they can get the salary cap squared away, then I like their chances to get back to the Super Bowl if they can bring almost everybody back. The NFC doesn't scare me. It really does not. There's going to be some transition. We don't know what Aaron Rodgers' future in Green Bay is going to be, although it looks like I think he's probably going to stay maybe. The Cowboys, I mean, there's always issues with that team. They always underachieve when they get to the playoffs. The Niners are transitioning to a new quarterback. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the NFC, where I think the Rams have a decent chance as long as Stafford wants to play and is healthy. I think the Rams have a decent chance of getting back if they can bring some of these guys back. But we'll see what happens with those two teams down the road. Robert, your thoughts?
Yeah, the situations here are kind of interesting. I know that one of the is interesting that when this came out, about Aaron Donald's future, and I could see him staying. He's only 30, but then again, he's also proven a lot, and he's finally gotten the ring that he's wanted. And you could see a guy, especially in today's NFL, a young player that's proven a lot, done it all, and he kind of sits back and says, okay, what else do I have to prove? I've gotten everything I want out of this game. He's probably one of the few players in the NFL today, not counting Tom Brady, who is a surefire Hall of Famer, just based on his play over the last several years. So, I think, just based on that, it'll be interesting to see what happens, for the Rams, because he's a centerpiece of their defense. And without him, I think that while they'll still have a pretty good pass rush, that's certainly a big loss in the middle. And then, how do you keep this thing going with the Rams when, you've kind of built your team not through the draft primarily, but through free agency and trades? How do you stay competitive when there's so many other teams in the NFC that have done it the other way? And teams in other sports have proven that, you can have one great year where you win a Super Bowl or win a championship, and you have a team that's been built with, some solid draft picks, but also some free agent pickups. But, it's costly to keep trying to do that year after year. And so you wonder, just from that standpoint, what's going to happen with the Rams. They do have a lot of free agents, entering the off season. The Bengals, the thing about the Bengals is that their biggest need is unchanged from last year. And that's the offensive line that they really have to get that figured out, or else I think very much like what happened with the Buccaneers and the Chiefs last year in the Super Bowl, when, the Buccaneers kind of provided a roadmap for playing defense against Patrick Mahomes. Joe Burrow isn't Mahomes. Burrow doesn't have Mahomes' mobility. I would argue he doesn't have his arm talent either. And so, Burrow needs a clean pocket. He needs a halfway decent offensive line in front of him. And he doesn't have that. I think they've lucked out this year because, Jamar Chase, you have T. Higgins. He's got some good receivers to throw to, and he's got Joe Mixon standing behind him, who also had a good year. But, I think if you're opposing teams, you know that, okay, if we're going to face Joe Burrow and the Bengals, unless they do something about that offensive line, it's a real vulnerability, and it'll be tough for them to get back now that they've been exposed in this way on the biggest stage. And the AFC is just tough. We'll get to this in a moment, but the Bengals, they did luck out. The Chiefs, after having reinvigorated late season run there, they crapped the bed in the second half against the Bengals and lost. You look at what happened against the Titans and then the Raiders. The Bengals, they did not have an easy road to the Super Bowl, and this time it went against them. So I think it will be tough for them to get back out of that conference, because there's a lot of good quarterbacks in that conference, for one, and you've got some teams that there's not a whole lot of changes. I'm thinking of the Bills. They don't have a ton of players that are going to be leaving after this season, so they'll have their nucleus intact. Same thing with the Chiefs, really. So it's going to be tough for the Bengals to get back to the Super Bowl, certainly in the next couple of years.
Justin, anything else you want to add about the Bengals and the Rams before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys pretty much hit it, though. Chris, I will say, like, the Rams are going to be a different team next year. Like, between all the several important guys who are just based on their age, we don't know we're going to come back. I think of Von Miller is an older guy who they kind of brought in as and the receivers. Like, you saw how limited that offense was yesterday once Beckham got hurt. And, you tear your ACL in February, he's going to be a free agent anyway next year. I'm sure he would have loved to come back to LA, but, you're talking an 8 to 10 month injury. He's not going to be ready to start next year if the Rams bring him back. Robert Woods tore his ACL relatively late in the season. You don't know his status. I don't think they have the offensive firepower that maybe their numbers indicate. And I think you saw the absolute best of Matthew Stafford this year, and you still saw kind of his limitations. He finished with decent numbers yesterday. He still threw 2 interceptions. One of them was a dumb throw. One of them wasn't necessarily his fault. But they had a lot of breaks go their way this year. I just wonder if those things will happen again next year, even setting aside the fact that they're going to lose some important guys from this team, and they're not going to have the ability to replenish like a lot of teams will because they traded away so many draft picks. The Bengals, I'm with you guys. I think they have a tough road. I don't understand these people who say immediately after the game, like, "Oh, Joe Burrow, he'll be back." Based on what? Like, just because he's young? How many times do we need to see a good young quarterback get to a Super Bowl, win it, lose it, whatever, and never get back? Because it's really hard. And
Dan Marino is the poster child of that one.
I mean, Dan Marino's been to 1. Aaron Rodgers got to 1. Drew Brees only went to 1. Like, it's very difficult to get back. And I'm sorry, but the Cincinnati Bengals are not the type of organization where I feel confident that they're going to put together a winning program every single year. They have a cheap owner that you would imagine should be taking advantage of this window where your 2 best players are going into their 2nd and 3rd year in the league and they're on cheap contracts. Are you going to take advantage of that? Take advantage of, bringing in free agents because you can afford them now, because in a few years you won't. So we'll see. I think the Bengals do have a little window here where they can really add to the talent on their team. But again, I don't think they're the organization that has a history of taking advantage of these situations. Yeah. So I'm skeptical, setting aside the stacked AFC.
Yeah, well, looking ahead the next season, I mean, look, if this is right now, at this moment right now, we're talking before free agency, before the draft, to me, the 2 best teams in the NFL, AFC and NFC, are the Bills and the Cowboys, okay? Those, and on paper, talent-wise, those to me are the 2 best teams in the NFL. Look at Justin; his eyes are going to pop out of his head. Okay, I'm sorry. The Cowboys, Dak Prescott. Okay, the weapons they have on offense and their defense. Okay, I mean, look, they definitely got outplayed by the Niners and deserve to lose that game. Okay, but if you look at the talent they have on that team right now, and you look at the talent the Bills have right now, I think arguably those are the 2 best teams in the NFL going into the offseason. Now, look, a lot of things can happen. Like I said, free agency, the draft, things happen in the offseason that changed what I'm saying right now could be a lot different come September. Okay, I get that, but going into the offseason, in my opinion, I'm not saying it's fact, it's just my humble opinion, the Cowboys and the Bills are the 2 best teams in the NFL. And if they can get to the Super Bowl next year, make me look like a genius, then great. But we all know that doesn't always happen. The best teams, I mean, look, the Packers should have had a great chance to get back to the Super Bowl. They had home field. I mean, they had the perfect game in the cold weather, the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field, and their special teams let them down. And Aaron Rodgers couldn't get the offense going, and they lost to a Niners team that realistically they should have beat easily. Okay, on paper. So I get it. And the Chiefs should have beat the Bengals. And of course, if the Bills could have held on for 13 seconds, they would have hosted the Bengals, probably would have beat them, and they probably would have got to the Super Bowl. And the Bills, I would have liked the Bills to beat the Rams if that was the case. So there's a lot of what ifs, couldas, shouldas, and all that other stuff. But I'm just saying, Cowboys and the Bills right now. Justin, since your eyes literally popped out of your head, I'll let you go first. Who do you think? I mean, going into next season, who do you think is going to get to the Super Bowl next year?
Chris, everything you just said about the Packers could be said exactly the same about the Cowboys, who also lost on home field to the same
I get that
team. But they also have a worse quarterback and just a worse overall team, a worse coach. Excuse me. I think that's just to quote Stephen A. Smith. I think that's asinine to say the Cowboys are one of the two best teams in football. Their defense has one stellar player, Micah Parsons. They have a cornerback who, I think can be taken advantage of. I'm not falling for the Diggs, hype because he had a bunch of interceptions. Some of that stuff is fluky. I think the Cowboys, they got a ways to go. And listen, can you name a big Dak Prescott win? I can't. He's won one playoff game in his career. He's been around, and he's going into his sixth year, I think, sixth or seventh year. That's an offensive line that does not play as well as its reputation. Ezekiel Elliott is not the same player he once was. The Cowboys are a national team. They're always going to get, favorable in the sense that, they're respected for some reason, but they always have those high odds. I don't see how you can bet on them. I think the two best teams are probably the Bills and Chiefs, just based on the certainty of who we know is going to come back. But, listen, you guys want to call me a homer, by all means. The door is still right there for the Green Bay Packers if Rodgers and Adams comes back. Let's not forget, they were a very injured team this year, and presumably a lot of their injured guys are going to come back next year. So if you're talking odds, I think DraftKings has them at like plus 1,400 to win the Super Bowl. We talked about, I said I don't believe in the Rams. The 49ers are going through a transition. Obviously, I don't believe in the Cowboys. And Tom Brady just retired. So, I think you can make a reasonable case that, hey, if the Packers bring the band back together, they should be the favorites again next year. That's probably not going to happen because the Super Bowl winner is going to get a good amount of respect. I will say interesting again, going back to DraftKings. I don't know how many times you second best odds to win it again the following year. DraftKings has the Rams as the third best odds, which I think just goes to show how much uncertainty they have going forward. But, hey, why not? Packers, Bills, I think that they're two of the three best teams going into next year. Again, assuming the Packers bring back their top guns. But get out of here with the Cowboys, okay? They haven't been to a conference final in 25 years, okay? Cut it out. It's silly.
All right. Robert, who do you think is going to get to the Super Bowl next year? Obviously the Bills, but who are they going to be playing against?
Well, I'm not picking the damn Cowboys, that's for sure. I mean, I think someone had a few too many Coors Lights yesterday and is hung over from that mountain water that you were drinking.
Mountain.
Are you referring to the Amazon water that they had a commercial for?
I must have missed that commercial. Go ahead, Robert.
Along with half the game that you missed.
It happens.
Yeah, I mean, out of the AFC, I think you're really looking at the Bills and Chiefs again, just based on who they will be bringing back. I mean, really for the Bills, they're going to have their main cast back. I think the only The only real question is, along the defensive line, do you bring back, a Jerry Hughes or a Harrison Phillips? I think, they're going to lean more toward Phillips in that regard because Hughes is older, and they have some young pass rushers. But you look at all the other positions, and they're pretty much the same. There's not going to be a whole lot of change there. We'll see what that happens in free agency and with the draft, and if there's any players that they decide to part with before the draft or after the draft, to make room for some others. So I think the Bills are in a pretty good position. In the NFC, I think it's tough. I mean, if Rodgers comes back and Devontae Adams comes back and the Packers are reportedly willing to go all in to be, Rams-esque here, I think it'll be hard to, not anoint them as the favorites in the NFC just based on that. To Ritz's point, they played a good chunk of the year without some key players, guarding Rodgers' blind side, David Bakhtiari, he didn't play all year. That was a huge loss for them that I think he played maybe one game, but, he didn't play for most of the year, including in the playoffs. So, I think that if they can get healthy, if they bring all those pieces back, which it sounds like they want to do, and we know the salary cap game can be played, and so I wouldn't rule it out. They certainly would be the favorites too, and you don't know what the Rams are going to do. I mean, I think it'll be hard for them to get back, especially if Andrew Whitworth is their left tackle, and left tackles as we just talked about with the Packers, that's a huge loss that they're going to have to fill in all likelihood. And then if Aaron Donald decides to step away, that's an even bigger loss, I would argue. So, they might be able to spend some money and fill those positions, but you've got two guys there that have been pretty good at their positions for a long time, and those won't be easy to fill. In terms of the odds, I mean, I know, the Cowboys are slightly ahead of the Packers for some reason, and the 49ers are up there. In terms of a sleeper, I don't know. It's tough.
Cardinals.
I don't get out of here with that Cardinals nonsense. I mean, Kyler can't even decide whether he wants to play baseball or football or, just pout about everything. I don't want to hear that nonsense. They throw one Hail Mary and you think that franchise is going somewhere. It's been going down the toilet ever since. I think if the Niners, if Trey Lance is a guy, if he develops into a guy, maybe they can contend. They certainly have some good pieces there that can get them back to the playoffs. But quarterback is a huge question mark there. But out of the rest of that conference, it's just tough. I think really the Packers would be silly not to bring Rodgers back, do everything they can to bring him back, bring back Adams, and do what they can to build that roster up, because this would be a golden opportunity for them to get to the Super Bowl and win it come next year.
If you want a long shot, I think there are two teams. Just again, looking at DraftKings, that you
in the NFC.
I just mean the NFL that you can see a path, and I'm talking like teams that are not in the top 10 as far as odds to win it next year. The Saints, because I think you're basically just if they can figure out the quarterback position, I still think that's a really talented roster with a good defense.
New coach, by the way.
Right, they're going to lose Sean Payton, but they have continuity, bringing in promoting Allen from
the defensive side.
So you get a quarterback. Maybe that's a place Russell Wilson goes. Michael Thomas is coming back, so I think they still have a lot of talent, and they're going to be in a weak division. So I like them as a long shot in the NFC. And then the AFC, I look at the Steelers for a lot of the same reasons. Their quarterback was a detriment, but outside of Ben Roethlisberger, who was not good, that's a really talented team. If maybe they get one of these quarterbacks who might be on the move, I think they're worth a long shot bet too. So that's going to be the story of this offseason. And Chris, as you've said a couple times, like a lot's going to happen between the draft and free agency. But I do see a couple teams that are kind of 2020 Buccaneers-esque, where you look at the roster and it's like, they check a lot of boxes talent-wise. They're just missing that most important position. And hey, what do you know? It's an off season where quite a few of those guys those veteran guys, proven commodities, might be available. So, we'll see.
All right, gentlemen. Anything else you all want to add, or you want to wrap this thing up?
I just want to add, one long shot that sticks out to me is on FanDuel anyway, are the Raiders at plus 5,500. That's a team that I just checking. They have the worst odds of any team in the AFC West, which is just insane when you think about the fact that team, with all the turmoil, made the playoffs, along with the Chiefs out of that division. The Chargers didn't, and certainly the Broncos didn't. The Broncos are getting a lot of love, I think, because of the expectation that in free agency, maybe they get a guy, maybe they get a quarterback that comes in and they can compete. But I still think even if the Broncos get a quarterback, it's going to be tough sledding for that team. They've got some good pieces, sure, but a quarterback isn't their only problem. So with the Raiders, Josh McDaniels coming in. This is his second go around as a coach. He's got Derek Carr there, so it's not like he's got to come in and groom a new quarterback. He's got a veteran quarterback there. So that could be an interesting combination. And, that offense is, pretty good. They've got some solid talent on the offensive side of the ball, and the defense is up and coming too. So a little surprised that they're that low, but maybe the coaching change has something to do with that or whatever. But, a little sprinkle on the Raiders. Who knows what happens? I mean, if the Bengals can make the Super Bowl, anybody can.
True. All right, gentlemen, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for joining us. It's been fun. It's next week. I don't know what we're going to be talking about. Maybe Winter Olympics or the baseball labor situation, or who knows what, but we'll figure out something. But hey, thanks for joining us, folks, and we'll see you next week.